Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. Everyone's trickling in now. It's so exciting to see everybody. Um, so, welcome. Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Olivia. I am a bookseller at Belmont Books. For those of you who don't know, Belmont Books is an independently owned bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts, and we've been bringing books to the community since 2017. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that we have a number of awesome virtual events coming up. Tomorrow night, February 9th, we are hosting Stephanie Graves and Alyssa Maxwell to celebrate the releases of their new books, Olive Bright Pigeoneer and A Sinister Service. And on Thursday, February 25th, we are back with more young readers content with our first monthly bedtime story time with M.L. Marroquin, author of My Hair is Magic, Michelle Garcia Anderson, author of The Owl Who Asks Why, for all of our bird lovers tonight, and Lucky Platt, author of Imagine a Wolf. You can register for these and our other events the same place you registered for this one, belmontbooks.com. And that's also where you can purchase tonight's books, Of a Feather, and Tui's newest book, The Dark Secret. Feel free, we want this to feel as much like a book party as possible. So please feel free to hang out in the chat, talk to each other, talk about your favorite books. Just make sure that that's the little blue bubble at the top says 2 participants, panelists and attendees. That's way you guys can all get to be friends, and we can also see you as well. I am so excited to introduce Dayna Lorentz and Tui Sutherland. Dayna is the author of the Dogs of the Drowned City trilogy and the No Safety in Numbers trilogy. She has worked in and around the foster care system, most recently as a law clerk in the Vermont Family Courts, but she has only just started exploring the sport of falconry. Dayna lives in Vermont with her husband and 2 children. And Tui is the author of the New York Times and USA Today best-selling Wings of Fire series and the Menagerie trilogy and the Pet Trouble series, as well as a contributing author to the best-selling Spirit Animals and Seekers series. In 2009, she was a 2-day champion on Jeopardy, and she lives in Massachusetts with her wonderful husband, 2 sons, and 2 very patient dogs. To learn more about Tui's books, visit her online at tuibooks.com. And with that, I will give it over to you guys. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you, Olivia. We're so excited to be here. We're so excited. Hi, Dayna. Hello. This is so amazing. I'm so excited for your book. I feel like I've been getting ready for it for so long.
Me too.
Yeah, you even longer. But it's finally here. I wanted to tell you, my mom stopped by today and she picked it up and was like, what a beautiful cover. What a beautiful title. And I was like, it is an equally beautiful book and you should take it home and read it. But then she wanted to take it and I wouldn't let her. So she's going to have to wait and get her own copy. So I think we were going to start tonight by you maybe introducing the book and then reading a little bit of it. Does that sound fun for you?
Yes, that sounds very fun for me.
Yeah, it sounds fun for me too. I'm very...
So I was going to read a little bit from the prologue of a Feather, which is from the point of view of my friend here, Rufus, the great horned owl. And this is actually my son's stuffed owl, and he's about 5 inches too short. So Rufus would be a little bit bigger than this guy right here. And this scene is actually about siblings. So I don't know how many people in our audience are either an older sibling or have been sort of picked on by an older sibling. I've been an older sibling and I've done the picking. But this scene hopefully will relate to both the pickers and the pickies. I'm going to move Rufus over here because he's being intrusive. The vole sticks its twitchy little nose out of the shadows and tastes the air with its whiskers. It thinks that no owl is watching. Think again, vole. This great horned owl has his eyes on you. I can picture it perfectly. The wind will ruffle my feathers as I dive. I'll feel the fur beneath my talons, and then snap! Breakfast. There's a crash, and the tree branches shiver with the impact. It's my sister, first. The sun's been down for an hour, and you're still in the nest? She squawks. I don't know why she's here. She fledged last week. Mother twittered with pride, watching first silhouette disappear into the trees. I tried not to notice Father glaring down his beak at me, like he doubted I'd ever fly off on my own. Shouldn't you be somewhere else in the forest? I hoot in reply. Doesn't mean I can't flap by to check in on my favorite runt. Actually, it does mean that, I grumble. You should be claiming territory, some other territory. First narrows her eyes and rouses her feathers. Who says I haven't? This owl says. I can tell from the low angle of her ear tufts, from the grumble in her hoots, that she hasn't. I feel a little bad for her. I want to give her a bit of a nibble on the beak, but then she lifts her tufts and chirrups. At least I'm not shivering in my feathers at the thought of hunting my own food. That's the first I grew up with, always pecking you right between the eyes where it'll hurt most. I contemplate slashing her with a talon. I am working on a plan. Planning is for prey, she says. You're a great horned owl. You hunt, you catch something, or you don't, and try again. You have your way, I have mine. I turn my eyes back to the vole hole. First bobs her head, widens her eyes. Care for a game of talons? Now I'm suspicious. Talons is a game father invented for us to prepare us for the real forest, he said. We start in trees on opposite sides of a clearing, and whoever forces the other one to the ground wins. First has fledged. She's in the real forest. How bad must things be going for her to want to play with me? Gah, who gives a hoot? This is first. She'll figure it out. Not now, I twitter. And I pull my feathers into my body, hunker my head down between my wings. I'm studying. Need I say that I was not the greatest player of talons? Need I mention that first, being the first to hatch, is bigger and stronger? And perhaps this is unrelated to our hatch order. Ruthless? What? First tweets. Is baby second afraid of stepping a toe out of the nest? She blinks her eyes, top lid down, clear guard lid across. When I don't answer, she flaps off the branch. Even owls have a hard time hearing other owls. Our feathers are so fluffy, they melt into the wind, become a part of it, so nothing, not our prey, not ourselves, can hear our approach. So it's only when first slams her talons down in the center of our nest, a wide circle of sticks father stole from a red-tailed hawk back in the dead of winter, that I realize she hasn't left for good. She grabs a clump of molted feathers from the nest and drops them on my head before she wings off. She's not taking no for an answer. I take a tentative step out onto a branch. First, I hoot quietly, are we starting? Should I fly off to the clearing? The ripple of wind from her wings hit me just before she bops me on the head with her feet. Already started. Great beak. I stumble, miss a talon, and am off the tree and flapping through the night. I weave between the branches, twisting with the air as it curls around obstacles. The forest gives way to grass, and I scan the stars for first. She's already swooping down toward me. I flip my feet forward, but too slowly, so I duck my head and dive, and she misses. That's cheating, she cries, carving through the night to make another pass. I'll try this move I saw father use on an eagle who attacked our nest. I pull my wing in a bit and dip it down. I should flip over so that my talons are where my back would be and then swirl around. But the air current tugs too hard. Instead of a graceful twist, I flop over onto my back in midair and begin to drop, upside down and with no way to flap. Help! First snatches my feet in her talons, drags me back up into the nest. What was that supposed to be? She drops me like a piece of prey onto the sticks. It's a special flip technique I'm testing out, I chirp with as much dignity as I can muster. First blinks slowly. Planning, testing, she hoots. Maybe you should stay in the nest, brother. Out in the forest, you either do it or you're prey. She lifts off and disappears into the darkening blue. It's full dark by the time Mother returns to the nest with a rat, which she lays at my feet. Was your father here? I thought I heard hooting. No, I answer. It was just me, practicing. Mother nibbles my tufts. My little perfectionist, even practicing his hoots. I bob my head away from her beak. Mother, I squeak, then try again in a decent hoot. Mother, should I? Am I? Do you think? She tilts her head as if trying to locate the rest of my hoots inside me. Every owl fledges in their own time. She pushes the rat toward me. Eat something. I look down at the rat, then back at the vole hole. You either do it or you're prey, first had squawked. I push the rat back toward Mother. You eat it, I hoot. I'm catching my own breakfast. Mother twitters softly, then flaps off into the night. She left the rat. I manage to ignore it until the sun pinks the edges of the sky, but then I gobble it down before closing my eyes to sleep. And that's the first prologue from Rufus's point of view.
Yay! And that's how we meet Rufus. It was so great. Oh my goodness, Dayna. Did you like hang out with owls to get ready for this? Because it feels like a very authentic owl.
Yes. Well, I started, this owl is my son's owl. I have a couple of other owls here. This is my son's little owl, Gweg. This is my daughter's owl, Flufter. And you can see that my children have brought me to the owls. I actually, when I was younger, really was kind of scared of birds. They kind of had a dinosaur-y look to them.
Yeah,
But my
really
daughter, yeah, but my daughter fell in love with owls. And as we started watching videos on YouTube, and then we started visiting owls, at one point there was this little nest really close to a bike path in the area where this family of barred owls was, and you could just walk right there, and there was this little tiny baby owl in a hole in the tree, and it was just so. They're such amazing creatures, and to watch them up close, especially now with things like on the internet, like Nest cameras, where you can basically they have a camera pointing at an owl's nest and you can watch them, just living their owl lives. And great horned owls in particularly are just so cool because they are so tough. They're called the tigers of the sky because they basically will attack anything. And there's a really cool video I found on YouTube of a pair of great horned owls stealing a nest from a bald eagle. And they are just fearless, and they're just such cool and interesting creatures that the more I learned about them, the more excited that I got to know more about them. So yes, I stalked owls. There's a particular great horned owl at Vin's that I had a very intense stare off with.
Is this the one? I remember you showing me a video a while ago of an owl where it suddenly you suddenly realized how long its legs were. It
oh yeah,
is it as it started trotting around? Was that a great horned owl?
That was a great horned owl, and it's really funny. I mean, this stuffed owl I think is a falsehood, because what's hilarious is all birds of prey, when they're standing like this, they have these long fluffy feathers that kind of cover their legs. But if they stand up to fly, and especially if they're catching prey, you see that half their body is essentially their legs. They have these super long legs. So I don't know, there are all these funny little memes where people will lift up the feathers and you'll just see how long an owl's legs are. Or if you see an owl running across the ground, it has these super long legs. It looks like they're on stilts.
Kind of that dinosaur thing again.
Exactly.
Whoa.
Imagine a dinosaur wearing a very long skirt, and then it lifts the skirt up and run on its little talons. That's what an owl looks like.
Oh my god, that's really cute. we went to some, back when we could travel, we went to a place in California that had all these different owls, and it had one that was really shy, but it was this tiny little owl, and so they would put it in a box by the window, and you could lift up the thing and peek at it, and it would kind of look at you what are you doing? And then you had to close it again really fast because you weren't allowed to look at it for too long. But it was amazing. I was I just want to stay here staring at this owl all day.
I wonder what the owl thought. I was I'm just gonna be calm. I'm right here, and then oh my god,
giant face, another giant face. Especially my kids who are "What is happening? Leave it alone." Yeah, I'm sure that was a bit alarming. Well, you do that really well in the scenes where Rufus meets Rini for the first time and is trying to interpret are these, she's trying to help him, and so is Beatrice, but of course the owl is okay, they're planning to eat me, so what does all this lead up to the eating me part? That must be what they're doing. What else would they want? So it's so great. That's
one of my favorite parts about writing an animal is just trying to look at the world from an animal's perspective, and just especially an owl, where these are such wild creatures. They are mostly active at night, especially great horned owls, and so I imagine they just don't have a lot of interaction with humans. So I figured Rufus, he's a young owl, he hasn't really left the nest, he's rather inexperienced in a lot of ways. So when he runs into a human being for the first time, it's going to be just totally a blank slate. He has no idea what he's looking at. And so one of his first ideas is, well, maybe they're just like large hairless squirrels. He's, I think like the idea of like how would an owl describe these things? And especially like one of my fascinating things that I was thinking about in terms of writing to get myself in the head of the character was the idea of like, what would an owl think of a human eye? Because owls' eyes are really all sort of that pupil, that center eye. There are no whites, and they can't move their eyes. An owl's eye shape, actually, they're fixed in their skull, so an owl can move their whole head, but they actually can't move their eye in the socket the way people do. So these are all just sort of things that I was thinking about in terms of turning that viewpoint, how different it would be, what would be the different things that an owl would notice about us.
Wow. Yeah. That's really cool. I hadn't thought of, I remember the scene where Rini is trying to figure out like can he move his eyes?
Yeah.
That's really cool that he would be like, what? What's up with that?
At one point he's like, when he's looking at her and she happens to be crying and he's just like, what is wrong? She's dripping out of her eyes. Like, is she broken? Like the eyes have all these red lines through them. He's just like, something's definitely broken on this side.
That's really cute. I saw a question pop up in the chat that I did work on the Warriors books, and that's what I was thinking too. Like, I wasn't the one who came up with how the cats saw the humans, but certainly with the Wings of Fire books, like trying to write humans into the world and like explain what the dragons think. Mostly they think they're delicious. That's like that's what the dragons think of the humans. Kind of like squirrels. They're like big squirrels who keep trying to steal stuff, and they're very delicious. That's what they're so far. So what was like the first thing that made you want to write this book? Was there like an idea, like a character or a scene that popped into your head? Like, what would you say was like the initial inspiration, if you can tell us without spoilers?
Oh, well, there were, I think there were a couple different pieces. I think my daughter and her love of owls, I wanted to write her an owl book. I read this great book called H is for Hawk by Helen MacDonald, which was all about falconry, but about falconry in this incredibly personal way. And also the fact that she has this one scene in the book where she's playing with her goshawk, and I was like, wait, you could play with a raptor? Like a raptor could have that kind of interaction with you. And just thinking about that got me just excited about the idea of making a book about falconry even more, even though falconry is so cool in its own right. But I think one of the main images that occurred to me was something that's in one of the early scenes in the book, actually. And there's this great place near where I live called Shelburne Farms, and they have a fantastic bird rehabilitation and education program there called the Outreach for Earth Stewardship, who were my expert readers on this book. And they have this, they'll just do these programs where they'll bring their education birds, and you can just sort of sit there and listen to them talk about the education birds, but the education bird is sitting right there with you. And they have this one fantastic red-tailed hawk named Abby. And she's just, red-tailed hawks are big and magnificent and beautiful. And just to be in the presence, I think, of one of these raptors and to just feel how powerful that is, that was the experience that really grounded it for me, the idea of seeing one of these birds and experiencing it up close.
Wow. That's so cool. And so in your mind, was it always going to be both perspectives, like the owl and the girl, or did you ever think of writing from just one, or like was it like essential to the beginning of the book that it would be both of them?
It was definitely essential that it be the both of them, because I think that, first of all, it's just fun to write from an animal's point of view. And second of all, I wanted to be able to use the animal's point of view to talk about some of, the tougher things that happened to Rini in this story. She's coming from a pretty tough place. Her mom is having mental health issues, and so she has to go for treatment. So she's left to stay with a grandmother, and the grandmother's house isn't so great. And so she ends up having to go and she's taken from her grandmother's house and has to go live with this aunt who she's never met before. So these are all like kind of big and sort of tough, rough things. And so I wanted to be able to talk about some of those things, not only through a different metaphoric sort of way by using Rufus's story, but also to give a funny perspective on sort of things. I think that Rufus adds a lot of humor to the story and a lot of lightness, and especially his relationship to her and how they change each other. It was important to be able to see it from both sides, because it's not just she's changed by this owl, it's that he's changed by her. And they're both helped and they grow through each other. So I think that because it's a story of them both changing, it was good to have their points of view.
Yeah, definitely. No, I totally agree. Like they both feel essential to me. And like Rufus does add that lightness, that kind of like helps you get through. Which I think, he does for Rini too. Like he adds something to her life that she didn't have before. And it's so great. Aw, little owl. Do you think were either of them harder than the other? Was it harder to write an owl point of view, or was one more fun? Like, did you find the owl more fun? Or
Well, not a leading question at all.
no. Just writing about animals, great.
I think that the funny thing for me is that Rufus kind of started, I think writers will talk about this, that like they'll start writing a character and then the character just kind of shows up and is talking and you're just trying to take notes as fast as possible. And Rufus was one of those characters. He kind of came in with his voice. I had this whole vision of him, like one of the first scenes I wrote is actually when he's sort of taken in by Rini and her aunt. And he's not doing too well. And he's placed in one of these, they put rehab animals in dog crates, I found, like doing research into animal rehabilitation. And just this idea of like, how would he think about this? How would he look at this? And his voice in that was really so much fun. But yeah, his voice came to me. With Rini, I knew what her situation was, but it really took a lot of writing and rewriting and redrafting to figure out, to get past her anger and defensiveness, to get to like sort of who she is and her true voice and her true feelings. Because I think that she was a character who came with a lot of attitude and a lot of defenses because of what the situation that she was in. So it took a lot of writing for me to get her to a place where I could get her on the page in a really authentic, deeper way and make her be a little more vulnerable.
Aw, well, you do it really well. I mean, she does. And like the way it's so important to get inside of her, like when she's like being all defensive like that, so that we know what's really going on, especially when she meets the kids at school. Like I found those scenes, I was like, it's okay, Rini, it's okay, your friends are all right. Like you can trust them, but you can understand why she doesn't at first. So those scenes, I really liked all of those scenes, the whole, like everything with Jamie and Jackson, basically. So just to stick with animals for one more minute, are there any other animals that you've ever wanted to write about or that you think maybe one day you would write about?
Yes, well, I did write a series from dogs' point of view. My family had a lot of dogs and I love dogs, and I had dogs at the time I was writing them, and we have a dog right here in the audience. Bo, do you have a dog's perspective on anything?
What do you think? You want a whole story about you? Yeah, this is Rainbow Dog. He gets Rainbow Dog. He gets scruffier with every event. Like I feel like like the next time I hold him up, it's just going to be fur. You won't even see his nose anymore. It'll just be like,
Don't even have to know it's a dog. It'll just look like a mop upside down.
Yep, exactly.
Well, I actually put your dog who was alive at the time of my dogs in Dogs of the Drowned City.
I remember. Aww.
So I love writing from dogs' point of view, and in fact, my next book has a coyote in it, and that was really fun because coyotes are obviously, they may look like dogs, but they're very different. And writing it from a wild dog's point of view was really, really fun. But I think the best part about an animal's point of view is it gives you the opportunity to look at the world in an entirely new way. And I think trying to find new ways of describing the everyday world is just exciting for me as a writer. And so
Yeah.
any animal I can that strikes my fancy. I mean, I've always wanted to write from the point of view of a squid, but
I was about to say, I'm waiting for your squid book.
oh my gosh, I just watched My Octopus Teacher. I don't know if anybody's seen that. It's a documentary about this guy who becomes friends with this little common octopus, and it was very sad, but it was very excellent. And I started thinking about that octopus's point of view.
Oh my God, I would love that. I mean, you've talked about squids for many years, and I feel like you're the person who is destined to write the greatest squid book of all time.
Destined for squids.
I keep looking over here because I brought one of my snails up to say hello. Oh no, he's gone back into hiding the minute I so I'll see if we can, maybe he'll peek out. If he is, little friend. So he's I actually deliberately picked the Shire one because this is Hercules Snail again, for all our Hamilton fans out there. And I was debating between him and Shellica Schuyler, but because I took him out of his terrarium and put him in like an open container on my desk. I keep checking to make sure he hasn't run away. And Shylock and Skylar is a little bolder. Like the minute we take her out of the terrarium, she's like, "See you later, suckers," and like takes off. So I was like, I'm gonna get distracted during the event and look back and be like, "Oh no, there's a snail loose in my office."
I have to say, if there's going to be something loose in your office, I feel like a snail is at least a safe animal, and it's not going to get anywhere too fast.
Right. One would hope, but my office is a mess. Like I'm only letting you see it from here up. But so if this, I did once. We were like we had it on the kitchen counter, and we lost track, and we came back, and we were like, oh no, and found it like on a chair, like that was not connected to the counter. It was like underneath the chair. I know. I was like, maybe our snails can secretly fly. So we do have to keep a little better track of them.
You need like one of those trail cameras on the snail.
That's right, a little GoPro.
Figure out its secret. Snail Pro.
It'd be really fun. I think it would be pretty boring most of the day. It'd be like, here's this piece of cucumber.
We're deeply investigating the cucumber.
Right, exactly. But that's what I keep joking, is that now that we have all these snails, my next series is going to be called Trails of Slime, and it's going to be the like adventures, the epic,
the epic adventure. I cannot wait to read that. Yeah, I see someone in the chat wrote the Turbo version. Yes, just like Turbo, it's going to be great.
Jonah does that movie. my 10-year-old. All right, I'm going to ask you serious questions now.
Serious question time.
Serious questions. Because we get a lot of questions about like the writing process. And so I wanted to know, did anything major change during revisions on this book? You are, I have to say, first of all, I've been following you and your writing and reading drafts, like obviously for years. And you are like one of the best revisers like I've ever met. I am like constantly flabbergasted at like how you are willing to go into a book and just like change so much in the revision process. Like you are very like, okay, I'm ripping it out and I'm going to fix it and I'm going to make, and it just gets better and better each time. And I think it's extraordinary. I think it's really impressive.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think that I think it comes from just having realized that at a certain point that I had to figure out what I liked about my writing and focus on that. And that also, I think I tend to write very fast. And so I can make a first draft very quickly and I'll sort of get through a story. But I feel like writing that story helps me figure out what story I meant to write in the first place. And so the first draft of this book actually had a much darker opening for Rini. And it actually was a little bit more trauma focused, where you didn't really know how Rini ended up in foster care, but it was pretty bad. And there was kind of a reveal later in the book that like, oh man, it was this bad. And I realized that was actually just, it distracted from the story I ended up wanting to tell. And it sort of, as you revise or as you write a book, you sort of you can't see the tone or the shape of the book until you finish it. And by the time I got to the end of the book and saw what I wanted to write, I realized that was not where the plot needed to go. It wasn't the story I wanted. And so I think that just having the confidence that you can always go back to the draft that you delete. I have many versions. All of my books are saved, and like if you go into my files, I have like 15 versions, because anytime I change anything like paragraph level, I save it to like version 1.2. And that way, that does give you a lot of confidence, because you're like, well, I mean, I could always go back. You know, like it's never lost.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I have a document that's just like every sentence that I take out of the book, I stick it in another document. I'm like, just in case I need that sentence again.
That sentence was just so good, I just can't let it go.
Exactly. Sometimes it's like fragments of sentences, but I'm like, just in case.
Well, yeah, I mean, like you have like a really good turn or phrase or something, or a really fun idea, and it seems to be like attached to this sentence, and you don't know why. Like you can't throw that little sentence away, but you know, you can feel like, okay, well, if I just put it over here, it's not gone. You
Right.
didn't lose it.
Yes, it feels a little less destructive and more like, yeah, absolutely. I'm distracted because there's some lovely questions already in the Q&A. Can I ask you a couple of these?
Of course.
There is, let's see. There's actually one about other owl books. So Guardians of Ga'Hoole is probably the most well-known series with major owl characters. Did you read the series as research for this one? Did you take any inspiration from it, or did you want a more realistic take on owls?
Well, yes, I did read actually the first book in Guardians of Ga'Hoole, and Catherine Lasky, I believe, is the author of those books, and she actually blurbed my dog series, which was awesome. And blurb is she wrote something very nice about it, which is really very generous of her. And so I definitely read it, but I think the difference between what I wanted to write and Guardians of Ga'Hoole is Guardians of Ga'Hoole takes place in this kind of like dystopian post-apocalyptic future where you're not quite sure what happened, but it wasn't very good. And owls now are kind of running things in this one part of the world. And so I wanted to set this more as, you know, your average everyday great horned owl who you could run into in the forest sometime, and what their perspective on things might be. So that would be the difference. I think I took the inspiration of, you know, just the idea of owls being in the world talking to other animals. I think one of the cool things when you write from an animal's point of view is setting up the rules for that animal. And one of the rules I came up with, actually based on some comments from my critique partners, was that he shouldn't be able to talk to his food. In one of the early drafts, I had the mice responding to the owl, and my critique partners were like, that's a little grim. So I made a rule that he could only talk to other birds, and particularly raptors. So he can understand crows, although it's very broken up language to him, and he definitely can talk to. There's a red-tailed hawk in this book who kind of helps him and is kind of the Obi-Wan Kenobi character for him in the story.
Yes, that red has a wonderful personality too. Be awesome. And then there's a question here. From Raven in the Philippines. Happy birthday, Raven.
Happy birthday!
That's so awesome. By the way, I was going to say about the prey talking. Yeah, it's going to be awkward when the dragons and the humans can talk to each other in the future. We're like, sorry about all that eating you we did before. But anyway, and sorry, Raven's question is, what is your advice to aspiring writers, illustrators who can balance with study? So I think it's advice to aspiring writers and illustrators, and it's also one of the questions I have, which is like balancing writing with everything else you have to do. And Dayna, you especially, between your children and your other job. Like, I don't even know how I mean, that was the other thing my mom said. She was like, when did she find time to write this? And I was like,
yeah, no, it's definitely one of those questions that keeps on popping into my head. But I think, you know, that it's taking, especially when your life is that full, I think it's really trying to carve out specific times when you're doing each thing, and then also trying to just give yourself permission to not be, you know, give yourself permission to not meet like these crazy deadlines that you set for yourself, and being realistic about, you know, how much can you really do. And I think that for me, it was, I get up early, and luckily only my son gets up as early as I do, and so I can usually sneak in some writing very early in the morning. And if he wakes up, he's usually happy to do his own thing and not, and so we can sort of do our own thing together. It's a nice early morning ritual for us. Although now we adopted some pandemic cats, and I would have brought them on screen, but they are a lot harder to manage than a stuffed owl, and they have more claws. But but now when I get up,
people should follow you online so they can see pictures of them.
Yes, you can see pictures of my very my very full of himself young cat Angus. But so waking up early now has been distracted by the cats, who are very excited about me being up early and have decided that's a great time to play and or be pet. And Angus in particular gets very, very insistent about when he wants to have pets. So, you know, it feeds though the creative flow to have my cats to talk to and to talk for my cats. You know, they have their own little opinions about what's going on. And we have our own voices for the pets. I think, you know, one thing that we passed down from, you know, my family when I was growing up to my family that I am now growing up with, is we talk for our pets and with our pets. And that also feeds into why I write from an animal's point of view. It's just something that happens.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh, you have wonderful animal voices. You were like, even before you had pets, I feel like you had an invisible dog. Didn't you have a pet that you talked to back when we lived in New York City?
Noodles, yes. Before I was able to have my own pets, we did have Noodles, the hypothetical dog.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
So for
I really love animals that much. Actually, my first pet, my mom tells me, was actually a bunch of earthworms. I was so desperate for a pet, I dug some earthworms up in the backyard and put them in a Tupperware with some dirt. And then it rained. And I came outside and found all of my pet earthworms floating in the rain.
oh
Apparently, this was what convinced my mom to get me a pet that was not a worm.
no, I would be worried it would go the other way. That she'd be like, if you can't even keep the earthworms alive, honey.
Well, apparently we went for a hardier pet.
There you go. Oh yeah, yeah.
Although earthworms are very hardy if you don't drown them in a Tupperware. So,
It's a little
not
weird.
to throw any shade on earthworms.
Oh my gosh. Noodles. I was so someone actually asked in the chat earlier, like, have we met each other before? And as you can probably tell,
No,
we've met each other
never,
for a
never
really
seen
long
you.
time. We actually went to high school together and then ended up at college together and then both lived in New York City. Still, yeah. And,
I followed Tui around actually. This is where I'm going to finally admit it's all been a plot.
I love this plot. It's a two-sided plot. I've been luring you around after me. Come hang out with me in New York City. It's fun. Although now you're in Vermont, which is not close enough to Boston. It's close, but it's not close enough. Especially right now when like I can't.
Now it's like maybe it could be on a different planet. You may as well be on Mars.
I know. It's so true. Yeah.
I feel like everyone though can relate to that. I feel like everyone, no matter where they are or how far away, even friends across town probably feel like you could be on a different planet and it would feel just about the same right now.
Right. It's true.
I think that's an important theme, pulling it back to the book. This whole book is about, the idea of being brave enough to reach out and connect to people. And I think that one thing the pandemic has done is it really has forced people to connect in different ways and find new ways of making friends and connecting with friends, especially kids who went from my daughter went from 5th grade to middle school through the pandemic, and with all the restrictions and how classes are divided and that kind of thing, it's really changed, I think, the whole relationship to how we make friends. I think ways we were able to do it in other times are not the same now. And so I think that idea of finding that brave part of yourself, about being willing to be vulnerable and reach out to somebody who is reaching out to you, is a theme and a message that hopefully will resonate in this sort of really strange time that we're in right now.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I know. I was thinking about it because we have a birthday coming up, and when the pandemic started, we had my other kid's birthday, and then it's been a full year, and we're getting to the other one's birthday, and I was like, well, by the end of this, everyone will have had a pandemic birthday, and like the creativity trying to figure out how to have a party and like still connect with everybody, even if it's virtually.
Yeah,
what we can do. But yeah, it's true. Of course, it would be nice if more of us could connect with some owls. That would be
yeah.
that would be really.
Well, I think had that not been the theme of the pandemic, is connecting with animals. Everybody's got their pandemic pet. I think almost every one of my kids' friends have gotten either a dog or a hamster or some kind of pet.
Yep. My kids have been asking for like all kinds of other pets, and I'm like, what? We have a snail, my friends. Like, what do you really need in life? Snail plus a rainbow dog. Hamster is the once, I gotta say. He was like, I'll settle for a turtle. I was like, will you? Will you?
And they live for a long time. So
that was one of my concerns. Yeah. Chickens. Oh my God. Whoever just said chickens, do not tell my mom. My mom has been dying to get us chickens. Adam started planting his vegetable garden that will get us through the apocalypse. And I was like, I can't, I have to keep them in separate rooms, Adam and my mom, because at some point they're going to be like, wait, chickens?
They go so nicely with my garden.
That's absolutely horrifying, actually. Oh, you know what? I think I distracted you from answering the actual advice question about
Oh,
like for especially I think if for kids on here who want to be writers. Do you have any advice about like any sort of part of the I mean I feel like there's a million answers to this question. So
I guess the first answer would just be to sit down and do it. I think that, the biggest obstacle to writing is the idea that it has to be something like major, like, oh my God, I'm going to sit down. And I mean, so one of the first things I definitely fell prey to this as when I was first starting. For example, I bought myself a very particular backpack that I was like, this is a backpack a writer would have. And it was a leather backpack in a time when everybody had leather backpacks for purses. And I was like, this is my writer backpack. This is the sign that I'm a writer. And that was absolutely not the sign that I was a writer. The writing is actually literally just the writing. So I think that, allowing yourself that freedom to just say, you know what, I want to write a story and just sit down and write one. And I think, Laurie Hall Sanderson has this, mantra that I've kind of tried to live by, which is even 15 minutes a day. Sit down for 15 minutes a day and just write whatever you've got. And it can be continuous, like you can continue a story, or you can, you know, just start something new every day. I think, there are great places where you can go online for writer's prompts, or you can buy books that have writer's prompts in them. And, I actually was just at a writer's conference, a fantastic writer's conference for published authors up here called Kindling Words. And they started each day this time, because it was a virtual conference, with this kindling the muse kind of idea where they gave us a writing prompt. And I don't do writing prompts really right now. I'm usually so busy. I'm writing a project or something like that. But I did these little writing prompts, and I found all these solutions to my story. I said like, oh, and there's the ending of my book. And it had nothing to do with the writing prompt, but these things can just come out. So I think, being able to say, I'm just going to do it, and I'm not going to make it a big deal. I'm not going to try and be a writer, in this very kind of like classic 1950s John Cheever, I'm going to put on a suit and go down to the basement and write for my, time, just saying I can do it for 15 minutes, no pressure. I'm just going to sit down and write. Don't go for a book a day. Someone saying, every once in a while I see an author post online, I was like, I had a deadline and I wrote 10,000 words today. And then they like pass out. But I think that's never a goal. I feel like that may happen, but you never aim for that. I feel like.
yeah, I feel like I learned a bad lesson in college when it was like, I have a 10-page paper, I can write it all in one night. And then it was like, oh, I have a 300-page book, I cannot actually write that all in one night. I gotta get a little better at managing my time.
You think you're like on fire, and it's like, wait a minute, no, I've only written 20 pages. And
yeah.
20 pages would be amazing. But they like 20 pages does not a book make.
And sometimes I know what's going to happen. Like I have it all in my head, but like the actual time, like my hands get tired, and I have to stop, which is the worst part about like now being like being slightly older than I was when we met. I'll just say is that I can't actually like physically write for as long as I used to, because my hands hurt.
Yeah, I find that like I'll get so excited in the same way about like a plot or a scene or something, and I just want to be like, I gotta like, I gotta type this whole thing, and I'll find like my brain gets exhausted after a certain like string of words, and I need to take a break, and it's so frustrating because I'm like, but I've got so much more to tell. I have to say, someone's here saying you can do talk to type. I have to say, I don't think I could, not just because of my perennial problems with Siri mistranslating me, but it's such a different experience. We have a mutual friend who has done that, who has talked her books out, and I think that I find that the experience of typing versus the experience of writing by hand versus the experience of talking like something verbally into the computer, there's such different creative processes. I find that if I really want to dig into a scene, I need to do it by hand. But if I'm trying to write a story, writing by hand gets really frustrating because it's too slow for my brain. So I can type a lot faster. But then talking, I'm not in that same flow. I feel like the typing slows me down enough where if I'm telling the story, I'll get ahead of myself and sort of lose where I am in a scene. So it's such a I feel like it's a different mode. So for me, that wouldn't be necessarily something that would work. But I mean, we definitely have a friend for whom that is something that has been a lifeline.
Yeah, and I think it is useful to hear it out loud, but I'm the same way. Well, I also feel like I revise a lot as I'm writing, like each sentence like will change, like I'll write it and then I'll rewrite and then I'll change it. So I feel like the act of figuring out how to tell that to the computer, like I mean, I've listened to, I think the same person you're talking about, talk to her even just in her text. She's like, well, like add a period and add a question mark, and like she does it very naturally now. But for me, I'd be like, oh no, wait, delete that. Wait, no, it just wrote. Oh no, wait, delete that. Like that's what the whole thing would be like. Wait, no, computer, stop doing that. Like that would be the whole book. So it would definitely be like a whole new thing to learn. And that's why I've never tried it, because I feel like jumping into it when my deadline is 2 months away, which it always is somehow, is not the time to learn a whole new way of writing. But I think it is a good idea.
I do find that I need to read my book out loud to myself. So that's actually one of the stages of revision, is once I get to a certain stage of a draft, I have to read the whole thing out loud to myself. And that's a way for me to find, that's usually a way for me to find places where a sentence just doesn't work rhythmically. Like it worked in my head, but as I'm reading it out loud, it just doesn't sound natural, particularly dialogue. And I tend to love writing dialogue. I know you write incredible dialogue. Do you also read out loud? Because that's the one thing that helps me figure it out.
I don't usually have time to read the whole book out loud before I have to turn it in, but there are scenes sometimes that I will read out loud. I mean, the other thing about doing anything out loud is that I'm usually writing at like 3 o'clock in the morning when everyone's asleep. And I feel like it would make me nervous that I would wake somebody up and then I'd have to spend an hour like hanging out with a child. So I tend to be really quiet at that hour just to be safe. But yeah, no, especially, I mean, dialogue's my favorite thing to write. So getting to read those out loud can be really fun.
Yeah.
There's a really good question in here. I think that I like it. It says, last month in a book event I did, the authors were commiserating about the guilt over not writing and dealing with stressful deadlines. So when writing is a chore, how do you reconcile that with the joy of writing? And what makes pushing past those hard moments and forcing yourself to write worth it for you in the end?
Well, I think that the joy in the writing comes from pushing past, I think that, like, when I have to write a scene, usually I will start in like a place where it's like I just have to get this down, and it's kind of the same idea of not putting too much pressure on yourself. Weirdly, I feel like almost the opposite extreme. Like when you have this pressure and you're like, look, I gotta get words on the page. It might start terrible, but oddly enough, it often leads to weird places. Like I'll find myself getting excited about a scene as I start writing it if I'm, really stressed out. I think also the one advantage, possibly, to how packed my life is that there's a lot of time where I'm thinking about the book, just doing something else. I'm doing laundry, I'm doing dishes, I'm driving around from place to place back when we went to places. And I would have, like I'd be thinking about the story in the back of my head. I'll be going over ideas. I'll go for a walk back when we had dogs, walk the dogs, think about the whole scene as you're walking the dog, especially when you're writing a book about dogs, it's helpful, but just having that time to put stories together means that when I sit down to write, usually I have only a very limited amount of time, but I've worked everything out to a point where I sit down and I really, and it does sort of flow, which is great. So I think that, yeah, when you have a hard time, sit down and just write. And when it's flowing, sit down and write. I feel like the answer is always just sit down and write.
Right, definitely. Yeah, I think that is really good advice. I think I also like, whenever I get really stuck or feel like bored with what I'm writing, I try to remember like why I wanted to write this in the first place. There was a moment in book 8, which is Peril's book, where I was like stuck and I was feeling like, ugh, I don't feel like writing today. And then I was like, well, how am I going to get through this book? And then I was like, what am I talking about? I have been dying to write Peril's perspective for like 8 books now. And I'm finally on her, and she's the funniest, like most energetic character. She can carry this book like on voice alone. I kind of felt like she was just so remembering like what drew me to this, like, why am I excited about this? Usually can kind of spark it all up again. Not as energetic as Sunny. This is true. She's energetic in her own way, a slightly more murdery way, slightly more rage-filled.
Peril's struggles.
Yeah. So like, like, and I have, for each of the arcs, I also have like a theme that I try to keep going back to, where I've like written a sentence about it, like at the top of my notes. And I'm like, here's the thing, this is why I wanted to write this. Like, if I'm bored with this scene, like, how can I get back to like what was exciting about this for me in the first place? And then hopefully it'll be exciting for people to read too.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the things about reading things out loud. When you read a scene out loud and you're getting bored with yourself, that's always a time to reflect and be like, well, wait, why am I writing this scene in the first place? How can I make this more exciting? And I have to say, usually the answer is I'm writing like a character in their own head and they're getting bored with themselves. And I'm always just like, let's add an owl. Let's add another person to the room.
Oh my God, I'm all about the extra characters. Yes, this is true. Yeah, I feel like the more character, that's one of the things I like about writing fantasy, I have to admit, is like more characters. And maybe they'll have magical powers and that'll make everything exciting again. There is a question in here that I think you caused by blogging about this, Dayna, where you mentioned the fact that I was your maid of honor at your wedding. And and it says, could I tell you about the wedding toast? Well, I actually went looking for it. I don't know where. It must be on another computer. My original file of it. But it was inspired by your story of like the proposal and how
my unusual
exciting poor husband.
And it was inspired by Dr. Seuss, who was,
yes, that's true. It was rhyming. And it was so it's just all about how much I love Dayna. Basically, I don't really have more of a story than that.
It was very moving.
That was really fun. That was man. One day we'll be in a room together again, and that will be exciting.
And that will be exciting.
Cole asks, as writers, each of you consistently work towards the idea of hope and the ability to change the world with it. Do either of you consider yourselves authors or fans of noble bright fantasy, or have thoughts about the subgenre? Have you heard of noble bright fantasy?
I have not.
I think I have, because I've been listening to this podcast that's Charlie Jane Anders and Annalee Newitz, and they did something about this, but it was a while ago that I listened to it. So, but I think just the idea, I mean, so it's kind of two questions in one: the idea of like writing about hope, and then the idea, then like noble bright fantasy, where it's like heading towards a better world, in like a fantasy genre.
I mean, I think that, I don't know, I find that's something that draws me to stories in general. So I would say that if you ended a book on a like, welp, there it is, like,
So that's
exactly. I mean, like that's kind of a bummer place to end. I think you always want to leave a door open, for a reader at the end of a book where they can find a way forward. Even if it ends in a sad place, I think you want to have a thought of how it can go. I mean, my YA trilogy ends in a very sad place, and I left a door open though for all of the characters, and the idea that there can be transformation, and that even in your darkest times, that's not the end. The end of the story isn't your darkest day. There's another day, and I think that's I don't know if that's noble bright or if that's just my view of the world. And it's certainly, Tui's the person who I call when I'm having a terrible day, because I know Tui's going to be the person to tell me there's going to be another day and it's going to be better. So, I think that's and I think the other piece that maybe is like a more publishing piece is that when you're writing a book for kids, generally that is, you want to have hope as part of the story, but I think that that's true of any story. I've read adult fantasy, and even the darkest adult fantasy tends to end on a note of a hope, and this idea of there's a door to go through, like you're not just left at the bottom of a pit and it's like oh, that was terrible.
Yeah, I would not want to read that book. I'm actually like in the middle of a book right now that I'm not sure where it's going. I'm a little worried it's going to be too scary or dark the second half. So I need to find someone who's read it. If any of you have read Plain Bad Heroines, can you please let me know? if it's actually like I'm about half, I haven't even gotten to the haunted school yet, and I'm like a little worried. There's a lot of wasps in this book also, which is not cool. Like for me. So that's where I'm but yeah, no, I also like I feel hopeful in general. And I think that's also like one of the things I love about children's writing, like you said, like it's I feel like just being a child, there's so much hope and potential there, and like all the things you could still do. Wait, there's a good question here asking you what your favorite owl species is. Is it?
Oh, well, my favorite owl species is the great horned owl because they're very fierce. I think that, all owls are super cool, but great horned owls especially. I think because they're just, they're so tough, and they're living in they live at such a hard and extreme life. I know there are a lot of other owls. There was a book recently made about the Blackison's fish owl, which lives in like Siberia, and that owl has a pretty tough life too, I think. But I think that the great horned owl, it's a widely common species, so it's also an owl you can find anywhere, which I think is really cool. But they're really hard to find. They hide in plain sight, and I think it's also cool because you could hear them at night. In fact, I heard one recently this fall. I was woken at we had the windows open, and I was woken at like 3 a.m, and I was woken by the hooting. I was like, what is that? And it was an owl hooting outside my window. I was visited by a great horned owl. So yes, I love them. They're wild, fierce, awesome local birds that you could meet.
That's awesome. And they have the great eyebrows too, right?
They do. They have such serious faces, and they have these little tufts here, which are called plumicorns, which is the coolest word ever.
Plumicorns?
Plumicorns.
That's amazing.
Yes. So they're not really ear tufts. They're not ears either. Owls' ears are actually over here. Their faces are shaped like this, like basically satellite dishes to draw all the sound to their ears here, because that's actually how they hunt. They pinpoint things through both sight and sound, but like they can hear a mouse under the snow or under the leaves, and they look for it. And then when they hunt, but what's interesting is when they actually they'll swoop down to eat something. And when they do, they actually catch it feet first. So they actually bend their feet like this forward. So they actually can't see what they're eating right when they catch it, but they could still hear it. So cool facts about owls. Owls are so awesome. Cool. I recommend anybody who's interested in birds or owls. There are so many cool nonfiction books about owls and documentaries about owls. I highly recommend it.
Don't you mention some of them in the back matter?
I do. So this is an adult book, but it's called The Secret Life of Owls, Hidden Lives of Owls. And this book was awesome to read because it was just a woman wandering around basically looking for owls. She's not a scientist, but she's talking to scientists, and she goes all over. And I was reading it and I'm like, oh, I can't wait to get to the chapter. So she does them chapter by chapter, owl by owl. And we get to this chapter and I was like, I've got to get to the great horned owl chapter. And the great horned owl chapter is titled Great Horned Owl and Great Gray Owl. So the great gray owl is this huge owl, no plumicorns, but it's a big owl that has the same territory. Great horned owls are kind of everywhere, but great gray owls are kind of in the Rockies. And I'm like waiting for the story. It's about this family of great gray owls, and you're like, oh well, where's the great horned owls? Where are they coming? And the only mention of the great horned owl is it kills the father of the great gray owl family. That's
no.
It's just the great horned owl. And so I like the idea that I think this may be the other thing that I like about great horned owls is they're just always the villain. Like they're attacking other owls' nests. They eat other owls. Like they're just the bad guy. And I felt like, wow, I want to get the perspective of this poor misunderstood villain owl.
Well, I know that is a thing Wings of Fire fans really like, is getting the villain's perspective. So hopefully there's a few of them watching.
Well, I don't think Rufus is a villain, but I think that definitely you get a sense of that point of view with his sister.
Yeah. That's true. Wow, that's awesome. I literally just was like, oh my God, the snail. Oh no, he's still there. Has not escaped yet. I wanted to make sure that we didn't miss an opportunity to do our favorite books. Wait, don't make us stop.
No, I wouldn't dare. I just wanted to make sure that we got to our favorite books here because We are just about out of time, but I definitely want to make sure we do our favorite books.
Yay! That'd be
All right,
awesome.
well, I've got a whole stack here.
Oh, lovely.
And I wanted to sort of mention, so one of the books I read in terms of like, a mentor text for this book was My Side of the Mountain, which is a book from a long time ago by Jean Grey Head George. And this is about a boy who sort of goes out into the wilderness. It's more of an adventure story, but it has falconry in it. And so he actually steals this baby peregrine falcon from its nest, which you should not do. That's a crime. It's a federal crime. And he gets in trouble in later books for this. But it's the story of him out in the wilderness with this awesome falcon. And then there was this recent book that came out actually that a friend of mine's daughter asked me about, and I love this book. It's called Falcon Wild, and this is actually about a girl who's a falconer who gets lost in the wilderness of Montana. And so this actually is another adventure story with falconry in it, which is super cool. If you like books with sort of dual people and animal perspectives, I read this with my mother-daughter book club and I loved it. It's called Song for a Whale, and it's about a hearing impaired girl and a whale who no one can understand his song. And so she comes up with a song that she thinks that he might be able to listen to and goes on an adventure to try and play it for him. And then thinking about, books about girls who are trying to find their way in the world and trying to find themselves. I loved this book by Barbara D. He's just not that, maybe he just likes you. And this book is a fantastic novel. It's about just sort of some of the confusing things that happen when you enter middle school. So it's a little bit of an older book, I think, than either Of a Feather or Wings of Fire. But I thought this was a fantastic book. I think she's in 7th grade in this book. But it's a great book about just sort of finding yourself and finding your friends.
Wait, can I just jump in and say that
yes.
Elliot's like current favorite book he read this summer is also by Barbara D. It's called Star-Crossed. Have you read that one, Dayna?
I have not, but I love Barbara D's writing.
Yeah, it's like it's this like 7th graders again, I think, and they put on their own play of Romeo and Juliet, but like the Romeo kind of flakes out, and so a girl ends up playing Romeo, and it's her perspective, and it's also like at the same time she's kind of got a crush on the girl who plays Juliet, and so she's sort of she's kind of trying to figure out like, is that what I'm feeling? Is this like what do I do about this? And Elliot's a big theater kid, my little one, so
as were we.
Yeah, that's true. We did theater together. So it's also wonderful. Anyway, I would also recommend that one.
Yes, and then this I think was our most recent book we read in my mother-daughter book club, As American as Pinner Pie. And I would actually say that these two books go really well together, A Good Kind of Trouble and As American as Pinner Pie, because these are both books about kids finding ways to express who they are authentically. And so I loved both of these books. I highly recommend them. They are really awesome and certainly super super relevant for today.
That's really cool. We have a book club at my kids' school that's like based on diversity. So we try to read a different diverse book each month, and I had Good Kind of Trouble written down when I'll look for American as Pinner Pie too. We just did Front Desk by Kelly Yang, which is
Front Desk is so good.
It's so good, and it was so much fun to talk about. Like everyone had something to say. And we did New Kid, the Jerry Craft graphic novel, which is
love New Kid. Yeah, there are so many great graphic novels, and I think the best part about a graphic novel is I pick them up and like I'll just sit down and read the whole thing. And so I did that with New Kid. I've done that basically with all of Raina Telgemeier's books.
Yeah, it's good. I agree with you, Raven. Twins is also great. That's another one that's on our list. Marian Johnson. Yeah, that's true. And and then I can go back and read it again and get more out of it. Like the next several times I read those books. I just wanted to share a couple in terms of like two perspective books. Bob by
I loved Bob.
Yes. It goes back and forth between her perspective and Bob's perspective, and Bob is hilarious.
In Australia.
In Australia, it is. Oh my God, there's a shout out to a series in here that she finds it on the shelf that I read only because my mom is from New Zealand, and I'm like, no one else has heard of this. It's like Snuggle Pot and Cuddle Pie. Like, what? I didn't know anyone else knew about that. I have Song for a Whale here too. And then Amari and the Night Brothers is a new one.
I just got that.
It's really good. I blurbed this one too. She's very cool. Lots of magic for. Oh no, the snail has escaped. Sorry.
You knew that was coming, right? It's kind of like,
Check it out.
that plot device.
Look at him trying to get away. I see you, snail. You got my eye.
If you have a snail at the beginning of the book, you've got to have the snail escape by the end of the book.
You're totally right. And then these are 2 books that I'm going to read soon. So I don't know yet if they're great, but I'm assuming that they're great because I love Mike. I love it. His other 2 books were wonderful. This is The Boys in the Back Row by Mike Jung. And then this one has dragons in it. So I'm excited. Laser Rap Games. So those are that's my little pile of books. So that's why Sky likes snails. Yes, you're totally right. That's exactly why Sky likes snails. Oh wait, and I have one more. Dayna, do you know the Breaking Cat News books?
I don't.
Oh my God.
Oh my gosh.
Cat News
I
books.
need those.
Yes, you do. Your cats would love them. Evie would love them. They are.
What is? Oh well, there was a series of graphic novels that you recommended to me that I love that are basically my sense of humor in a book, which were the Mr. Pants series.
Mr. Pants.
If anyone hasn't read Mr. Pants, just go read Mr. Pants. Especially, I feel like parents or siblings, I don't know. Everyone should just read Mr. Pants.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, they're one, and this has it's also very funny. It's like the cats are all like reporting on the news of the day of what's going on around their house and how the owners forgot to feed them for an entire hour today and like what's going on and it's an emergency. So it's really funny. Yeah, so you would love those. There's a bunch of those.
I would love those.
Then wait, before we have to go, Dayna, tell us about your next book. What are you working on now?
Well, I have another book, another middle grade book coming out next January that is about a boy who gets himself into some real trouble and a coyote who gets caught up in the trouble that he causes. So look for that. Wayward Creatures in January 2021. I just got page proofs for it, so I'm excited to dive back in.
Awesome. Oh, I'm so excited. We can do this again if you want. We can just hang out and talk about some more.
Yes, please. That sounds wonderful. It has been
not January 2021, sorry, January 2022.
Yes,
I can't even believe that I'm using. Yeah, thank you for clearing that up, but I'm also horrified. I feel like time.
I think
I've gotten to
January
silly numbers.
Felt so far away for so long.
Yes, it's true.
Like
Thank
that
you
thing like in.
so much for being here. This has been so much fun. I've learned a lot about owls and snails.
Take it away for it. Seriously, snail.
I am such a big fan of snails and mushrooms and frogs, and this is just very exciting.
I love frogs too. Oh,
It's so cute. I could do that for a while. Thank you all so much for coming. I know it means the world to us at Belmont Books and to our wonderful authors to see so much love and support, especially in this wonderfully excellent chat. So make sure if you wanted any copies of those books, you can find all of them on belmontbooks.com. You can also get Of a Feather starting on the 9th tomorrow. We're so excited. Thank you all so much for being here.
Yes, thank you everyone, and thank you to Belmont Books. I miss you guys so much.
We all miss you, and hopefully we'll see you all soon in the bookstore.
Yes, thank you, Belmont
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Stay
Have
safe.
a great night.
And keep reading.
Bye. And thank you, Tui.